Hello everyone, I'm very glad that you listened to my story. Please give me a follow and like the video if you enjoyed it. Feel free to comment and provide feedback so I can improve the sound quality. Yes, I will now continue the unfinished story. Chapter 41, The Mysterious Space. The culprit behind the changes was a round, translucent object like a small bubble about the size of a pellet of rice that appeared in the center of Liu Ming's spirit sea. Liu Ming could swear that there had never been such a thing in his spirit sea before. It had been this thing that had spun crazily and wolfed down all the folly that Liu Ming had made while training before. This object was finally calming down. Perhaps this thing was the cold air that drilled into my body before, otherwise there's not another likely explanation for this situation. Liu Ming forced down the fear in his heart. His mind had moved quickly before finally finding a reasonable explanation. However, this thing did not look like any evil spirit or soul that was recorded in the ancient books. If so, Liu Ming would have been seriously worried. Liu Ming did not even have the time to wipe the sweat off his forehead as he hastily focused his mind and entered the dantian of his body. He carefully looked at the small bubble in his spirit sea. This bubble looked full, but it was strangely clear inside, and no matter how you looked at it, it did not look like it could have eaten so much folly. After a short while, Liu Ming still did not see anything useful with his mind. And this object in his spirit sea was not moving at all, like it was dead. Liu Ming became hesitant. However, after steeling himself and gritting his teeth, he controlled his mind and lightly touched the surface of the bubble, wondering if he could enter the bubble to examine it. A peng sound rang out. The bubble broke like a mirror the moment Liu Ming's mind touched it. Liu Ming was shocked and, before he could react, heard a weng sound. It was as loud as thunder all around his ears. His head sank and his eyes went dark before he entered a strange, unfamiliar, grayish place. This place is... Liu Ming was scared when he saw this. He looked around and saw walls of gray fog surrounding him. The fog surrounded a square space that was about 140 to 150 feet in both length and width. Liu Ming then raised his head to look up before he looked down. The sky and the ground were also made up of gray fog, but the space between the floor and the ceiling was only 50 to 60 feet tall. Liu Ming could feel his heart beating crazily. After a while, he finally calmed himself down and started to think about the whole process he went through to get here. Without a question, the reason he came here was because he touched the bubble in his spirit sea. But what was the bubble? And why did it send Liu Ming to this strange space without any signs after it broke? The correlation between the two events was indecipherable. Looking at the dead atmosphere of this space, it did not look like there were other creatures living here, rather it looked like a prison cell to jail criminals in. Standing in the same place with a worried expression, Liu Ming thought for a while, but still he could not come to a reliable conclusion. Even after he shouted a few times, nothing strange appeared. Liu Ming steeled his heart and carefully bent down to use one of his hands to wipe at the fog he was stepping on. His whole hand only went about an inch into the fog before it was blocked by a strong but invisible layer. Liu Ming's eyes glittered as he stood up. He mumbled a few sentences, took a deep breath and opened his mouth toward what was below him. Hoo! A strong gust of wind rushed out from his mouth and hit the wall underneath the fog. An unbelievable scene appeared. The moment the strong gust of wind touched the fog, the wind entered the fog without a sound and disappeared. Liu Ming's expression changed slightly, and with one-handed signs, the incantations from his mouth also changed. With two pu-pu sounds, two sharp green wind blades shot out from Liu Ming's hands. However, when they sliced into the fog below, they strangely disappeared again with a flash. Nothing else happened. Liu Ming's complexion turned green, but he did not give up and started trying the fireball spell and the other spells that he had learned to attack the fog below. But it was all a waste, nothing happened. This thing that looked like normal gray fog could actually absorb and eat spells. Finally, Liu Ming stopped attacking but stayed in the same place, quietly thinking. Then using one-handed signs, he made gray clouds gather beneath him to lift him up. Then, once the cloud flew a few feet from the ground, it suddenly stopped. Liu Ming stuck his two hands into the fog and started slowly checking the fog wall. After a long time, Liu Ming sighed and dropped out of the air. It seemed as if he had not obtained anything. However, afterward, Liu Ming no longer hesitated and walked with big step in one direction. With a twist of his arm, the tiger's bite bracelet started to glow. Then, Liu Ming pressed his hand on the fog wall with his 5 fingers spread apart. Tiger roar! Black smoke started surfacing on Liu Ming's body as he suddenly yelled out. The bronze bracelet on Liu Ming's wrist became a ball of bright yellow light on the spot. Within the light, a blurred tiger head suddenly appeared and a white sound wave rushed toward the fog wall in front of Liu Ming. Pu. The white sound wave slightly rocked the surface of the fog a few times before it too completely disappeared. After seeing that his strongest attack skill had no effect, Liu Ming's complexion became ugly and unnatural. With the current situation, Liu Ming was trapped here alive. What made matters even worse was Liu Ming did not have many pills of fastening with him. After all, he was originally supposed to go retrieve his new portion in half a month's time. As for the problem of drinking water, it was actually an easy problem to solve. He could conveniently use the condensation technique to collect a mass of water. For the next 3 days, Liu Ming naturally would not be willing to wait helplessly for death. So, Liu Ming went about checking almost every inch of the whole area, using all of the different methods he knew. However, he could do nothing to the surrounding fog walls. This time, he could only helplessly accept his own helplessness as he sat in the center of the space cross-legged with a gloomy complexion, waiting. However, waiting in this narrow space by himself, even knowing that he was slowly awaiting death, was definitely something that would test Liu Ming's state of mind. Liu Ming sat there like this for half a day before he smiled bitterly and started to make hand signs before he began to cultivate. But a scene that amazed him appeared. No matter how Liu Ming pushed, gathering as much of the natural yuanli from the outside into his body as he could, the folly that gathered in his spirit sea did not increase by even a sliver. As for the bubble that originally appeared in the spirit sea, its trace was nowhere to be seen. Under Liu Ming's surprise, he became ever more depressed. Since it was impossible to increase folly, continuing to cultivate the dark bone method was naturally pointless. Under this helpless situation, he could only slowly start practicing the fireball technique, water arrow technique and his other techniques. Time passed by bit, in a flash, something like 7 or 8 days had already passed by. There was nothing like sunset or sunrise in here. The reason why Liu Ming could still accurately predict time was all thanks to the roughly made, small, bronze hourglass that he carried with him. The hourglass was specially made by him back in the days at Savage Island. The fine sand inside flowed especially slow, taking no less than a whole day for the hourglass to have the sand completely flow from one side to the other. Because he had some affection for it, Liu Ming always carried it with him. He never thought that it would now be of great use. However, after a few days, Liu Ming was again in exultation after discovering something. After this long time period, he unexpectedly never felt any hunger or thirst. Although this was slightly unimaginable, it was definitely something worth celebrating for him. And thus, at long last, he did not need to worry about starving to death in a short amount of time in this place. Since his worries about the future were temporarily eliminated and he was still unable to leave, Liu Ming simply started concentrating on practicing the few techniques and spells he knew. Every day during this period of time, Liu Ming would carve a line on the lid of the wooden box that he carried with him, so he could accurately remember the amount of time that had passed. Since Liu Ming no longer needed to waste time doing other things, and with his talent of doing 2 things at once, Liu Ming evenly practiced all his techniques and spells all to the point of initial spell mastering, over the time frame of 3 to 4 months. In the following time period, Liu Ming concentrated on practicing his wind blade technique, which was his fastest attacking technique of all the basic techniques. If Liu Ming did not do this, perhaps he would really lose his mind staying in this boring environment by himself. 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, half a year hurriedly passed by. One day, Liu Ming woke up from meditation. After feeling that the energy he had consumed over the previous few days had recovered anew, an incantation came out of his mouth as he made a hand sign with 2 hands. Then, Liu Ming raised both of his hands at the same time. After a few su sounds, 6 slightly green wind blades were fired consecutively. Like always, they all completely disappeared into the fog ahead. In the time of 10 breaths, I can send out 6 wind blades. This should be the complete spell mastering of the wind blade technique. Seeing this scene, Liu Ming muttered to himself. However, afterward, he brought his hands together in front of him and more incantations came out of his mouth. Liu Ming's 2 hands spread apart again, a bright wind blade 3 to 4 times bigger the blades that were generated before appeared before him. But when it just condensed to half the size, a bang sound suddenly could be heard and the giant wind blade again dissolved into points of light. Liu Ming saw this phenomena and slightly knit his brows. This method of combining the power of several wind blades at the same time was something he naturally thought of not too long ago when his speed of releasing the wind blades had reached a certain limit. But to make this come true, one aspect was that there had to be enough folly, while another aspect was that one had to be more proficient with the wind blade technique. Liu Ming thought of this while habitually forming a hand sign with both hands to continue practice the wind blade technique. But at this moment, Liu Ming suddenly heard a hum in both ears. With the sound, his head sank while both of his eyes closed involuntarily. Then, after opening them again, his body impressively appeared in a sunlit room. In fact, Liu Ming was sitting cross-legged on a futon while both of his hands were mid-hand signs. It was as if Liu Ming had just sat down. This time, Liu Ming was really stupefied. This room, as well as the familiar surrounding environment, was indeed the practicing room that Liu Ming had disappeared from half a year ago. He just returned to this place like this. Liu Ming felt that his head was blank. He unconsciously and slowly looked around, unable to think about other things for a while. Chapter 42, A Dream. When Liu Ming's eyes fell upon a wooden chest by his side, he regained some consciousness. Surprisingly, there were still a dozen pieces of bright red rat meat inside the wooden chest. The color of the meat remained the same from when Liu Ming found them, there were no visible changes. Liu Ming was amazed. Since the meat of monsters had folly infused into it, it kept fresh longer than normal meat. But naturally it would be a joke if someone claimed that it could still maintain its freshness after half a year. Liu Ming's expression changed several times. He then shifted his eyes to the nearby wooden barrel that was still filled with water. Afterward, he touched his back, it was still wet, as if he had just been sweating. Liu Ming's face became even uglier. Suddenly, he remembered something and quickly pulled out 2 items from his sleeves, a simple-looking green wooden chest and a roughly made copper hourglass. The green chest looked ordinary and the hourglass remained quietly in Liu Ming's hand. All of the sand was cornered up on one end. So that's how it is, Liu Ming said while taking a deep breath. His face became flushed. The chest and the hourglass were both tools that Liu Ming used for calculating time. Liu Ming remembered clearly that when he left the area that he was stuck in, the surface of the wooden chest had been engraved with dense scratches. The copper hourglass was made to conveniently track time and it was always left on the ground of that mysterious space. He never took it when he left. The previous mysterious space Liu Ming had experienced seemed as if it was all an illusion, and Liu Ming thought that he had never been in any kind of space. The half year that Liu Ming been trapped seemed all but a simple dream. But the past 6 months he spent trapped in the foggy room seemed too real. Liu Ming could even clearly remember how he practiced his techniques every day. After Liu Ming had calmed down, he clenched his teeth and sank his consciousness into his body to take another check at the situation in his spirit sea. He ended up feeling relieved. Liu Ming's spirit sea was empty and the broken little air bubbles had disappeared. It was lucky that Liu Ming had gotten rid of this evil thing through just a heavy dream. As Liu Ming thought about how lucky he was, he continued practicing the dark bone method to give the spirit sea a slight push. Liu Ming's expression changed instantly and he yelled out by instinct. Impossible, how could the disappeared folly be regained? After pushing the spirit sea, Liu Ming found that he had regained a lot of his folly from before. More than half of the folly that had been swallowed by that air bubble had returned. What surprised him even more was that, even though he had less folly than before, it was now much more pure. Still amazed, Liu Ming quickly observed his spirit sea again. Liu Ming's spirit sea was still the same size as it was before, but the silver glow it gave off was much softer and it seemed as if it was slightly more solid. According to the records, this was indeed an after effect of folly being purified. But purifying folly was not only extremely dangerous, but also a very time-consuming task. Generally, when a spirit apostle or spirit master has been stuck at a bottleneck for several years and there has been no improvements in cultivation, they take the risk and give refining their folly a try. A cultivator that had quite pure folly would be able to store more folly in his body than other cultivators of the same level. In addition, his spells and totem activations would be more powerful. To Liu Ming, this was a very good thing. Needless to say, this purified folly was caused by the absent air bubble. As Liu Ming's happiness slowly faded away, he couldn't help but wonder. To figure all this out with the limited knowledge, Liu Ming meditated for an entire hour before coming back to his senses. Where did that air bubble come from? Why did it swallow folly? And after going through a dream, half of the purified folly was returned. This was too complicated. Liu Ming's head swelled up, but he still couldn't figure out the relationship between the events. Whatever. That thing has already disappeared. And losing half of the consumed folly to gain back a purified half of it isn't too much of a loss either. Liu Ming thought, shaking his head. At the same time, Liu Ming turned and looked at the only open window of the house. The sun was high up in the sky, scorching brightly. Liu Ming squinted his eyes. If he remembered correctly, before he was pulled into that weird space, the sun was also in that very same position. Thus, all that he had gone through happened in a short moment's time. Thinking of that, Liu Ming stood up, opened the wooden door and walked out of the house. Liu Ming stood in the little garden and threw his arms wide open, embracing the warm sunshine. After that, he felt much better. Having to live in that mysterious space for half a year was definitely a test of the will. Even thinking about it now made Liu Ming afraid. Thankfully, he came out of that space after 6 months. If he were to stay there any longer, even if it had only been a dream, he could become mentally damaged. Thinking of his mental strength, Liu Ming opened his eyes. He realized that his mental energy was slightly stronger now than before. It wasn't obvious, but it did indeed increase in strength. Liu Ming smiled bitterly. So in the end, he had received a blessing in disguise. Still musing, he turned his glance to a big tree outside his courtyard. Beside the tree there used to be a smaller tree. But now all that was left was a bare trunk. He cut the small tree with wind blades a few chapters earlier. Seeing it, Liu Ming laughed inside. He lifted his arms and casually murmured a spell. Tut-tut, 2 fireballs appeared on Liu Ming's palm. And in a flash, they became 2 glowing light balls racing toward the big tree. Boom! Boom! The big tree was eaten up by flames and instantly burned to ashes. Liu Ming's smile disappeared from his face. He froze. This was the fireball technique that he had practiced to initial spell mastery in the mysterious space. Wasn't it all a dream? How could he so skillfully display this technique here? Liu Ming's mouth twitched. Suddenly, he changed the incantation, flung his arm, and shot out a white streak of light. A flash sword. Two little holes the size of thumbs appeared on a big rock beneath the burned tree. This was the water arrow technique that Liu Ming had practiced to initial spell mastering. Liu Ming licked his chapped lips. His eyes were filled with a fiery expression. Without pausing, he chanted another incantation and lifted his arms. Pu, pu, pu. 6 green wind blades were shot out in the blink of an eye, instantaneously slicing the big rock into a dozen slices. This was the wind blade technique that Liu Ming had practiced the most. So it is true, the training on the techniques in the mysterious space was effective. Liu Ming murmured. His face was filled with excitement. Liu Ming continued to cast different techniques in the courtyard until he had exhausted all of his folly. He then stopped with exhaustion, laid down on the grass and closed his eyes. What a pity! If only I knew that the mysterious space had this effect, I would have stayed longer. Liu Ming sighed, slowly opening his eyes. Liu Ming clearly knew that what happened in the mysterious space was much more complicated than just a mere dream. However, the little bubble did not exist anymore, which was a pity. Liu Ming could probably never repeat this experience again. He could only pretend that what happened in the mysterious space was a destined chance. Finally, Liu Ming recovered a normal state of mind and returned to his training room. A few days later, when Liu Ming finally ate and refined the last of the rat meat, he stayed in his accommodation and continued to train for a majority of a month. After a few months, Liu Ming felt that he had made all his preparations and finally, he left his dwelling and went to the duty hall. 4 months later, a few hundred miles outside of the barbarian ghost sex gate, at the edge of a pool which emitted a strange coldness was a bamboo pole. One of its ends was thrust a few inches deep into the mud and on the other end hung a white rope. At the bottom of the rope hung a fat gray rabbit. This rabbit only kicked lifelessly once in a while. How long the rabbit had hung was unknown. With a hwala sound, a strange fish which had an eagle's mouth and a snake's body emerged from the pool and bit at the fat rabbit. With a pu sound, a black rope shot out from the bush near the pole and wrapped around the strange white fish in the blink of an eye. Afterward, it pulled the fish until it was in front of the bush. Under a feeling of fear, the strange fish let out a weird goo-goo cry and opened its mouth to shoot out a spout of white water, which made the surrounding ground into a hideous mess. After some hard struggles, the weird fish became dispirited and stopped moving. In the end, the spout of water coming from its mouth stopped and it could only lie on the ground, unmoving. This eagle beak fish is actually really crafty, but after waiting 2 days and 2 nights, it still obediently took the bait. The sound of light laughter spread from the surrounding bush. An average-looking teenager in green robes stepped out with a smile on his face. It was Liu Ming. He walked in front of the weird fish and only after kicking it with his feet did he take out a fish basket from his back in no hurry and put the weird fish into it. Just when Liu Ming wanted to turn around and leave, he suddenly noticed the gray rabbit on the bamboo pole and couldn't help say to himself, "This time, it can be said that you helped me big time, so I'll let you live." Just when Liu Ming finished speaking, he raised his arm and a slightly green wind blade suddenly shot out, cutting the rope in two. Once the fat gray rabbit in the air was free, it immediately splashed down and swam to the shore, before leaping into the nearby underbrush with surprising speed. Seeing this, Liu Ming smiled a little. He then immediately formed a hand sign, and was about to start flying while carrying the fish basket. Chapter 43, A Small Fight. But at this moment, footsteps were heard coming from the forest not far away. Suddenly, 3 young male disciples wearing barbarian ghost sect clothes came out. They all looked like they were in their 20s. When they saw Liu Ming with his fish basket beside the swamp, they paused for a second. When Liu Ming saw this, he slightly knit his brows. He then nodded his head to show respect and continued to use his soaring sky technique. Gray clouds started to condense beneath his feet. At this moment, the disciple standing in the middle of the 3 disciples looked at the slanted bamboo pole stuck into the mud and some fish scales from the strange fish that were scattered beside the swamp. Immediately, his eyes shined and he moved his arms. One of his hands, with a golden fighting glove on, hit towards where Liu Ming was standing. A misty ball of golden light shot toward Liu Ming. Liu Ming was startled. Without hesitation he moved his legs and jumped off the gray cloud, successfully landing at a spot just a few feet away from his previous position. The gray clouds produced by the soaring sky technique vanished after a loud explosion, caused by coming into contact with the golden gas ball. "You three seniors, what do you mean by this?" Liu Ming stared at three seniors, his face showing unhappiness. "Haha, don't be angry, Junior, I'm just here to ask whether you have already caught the eagle beak fish." The disciple in the middle, who looked pale and was in his 20s, said jokingly. The two disciples beside him, who looked about the same age, turned their eyes toward the bamboo fish basket behind Liu Ming. Their eyes showed unrestrained greed. "What if I say yes? What if I say no?" Liu Ming appraised the three as he said this using a faint voice. "If you say yes, then everything will be easy." What a coincidence, the three of us were given the task to catch the eagle beak fish alive. Now that we have arrived, are you going to let us go home empty-handed? The disciple with fair skin replied as he yawned. "Oh, then what will the three of you do?" Liu Ming replied after he sighed in his heart. This was his third time facing this kind of situation after he started accepting contribution point missions alone. However, Liu Ming had met a lone barbarian ghost sect disciple both previous times and was able to beat them up. This time though, things were not going to be so easy with three disciples. It was no wonder that many of the sect disciples worked in groups when they carried out these contribution point missions. Liu Ming used his mental strength to look at his surrounding. He could approximately guess that the two disciples standing at the right and left of the middle disciple had folly more or less at the same level as himself. However, for the one with fair skin standing in the middle, his folly was a level above Liu Ming's. Through the 4 months of intensive training, Liu Ming was about to master the second stage of the dark bone method. This meant that the disciple with the fair skin was at the middle spirit apostle level. While Liu Ming was still analyzing the power of his opponents, the disciple with fair skin spoke with a grin. "Very easy, this sect mission will gives a total of 10 contribution points with 30 spirit stones. You just need pay each of us 20 spirit stones, or just give us the eagle beak fish and I will give you 20 spirit stones. How about it? 20 spirit stones. Clearly the three of you are here to rob. Don't you guys feel scared of the consequences of breaking the rules?" Liu Ming spoke with a face without expression. "If Junior feels that we are here to rob, then just accept it. However, about the rules, you don't have to worry about it so much. Although the rule itself says, disciples within the sect are not allowed to fight against each other, in reality, every faction's disciples are encouraged to follow the law of strong. The strong are allowed to bully the weak, and as long as we do not to fight in front of the martial uncles or enforcer disciples, we will be fine." Haha, it seems like Junior's time in this sect hasn't been that long. There are still plenty of things you don't know. However, after today, you will learn a new lesson. One of the disciples who had a big head said with a tone of sarcasm. "Enough nonsense, if Junior doesn't want to hand over the eagle beak fish, then let's fight. I'm scared that if we waste any more time, someone is going to come interrupt us." The disciple with fair skin said. When he finished his sentence, he punched out twice, causing 2 hoo-hoo sounds. Immediately, 2 gold gas balls dashed toward Liu Ming. The other 2 disciples started to mumble simultaneously. With a lift of their hands, a white thread-like thing shot out from each of their hands. Spider silk technique. Liu Ming narrowed his eyes and instantly understood the background of the white thread. This kind of technique, which could be used to capture an enemy alive, was a more commonly used technique among the disciples when they fought against each other. Liu Ming deeply inhaled and on his wrist, the tiger bite bracelet flashed. Following that, Liu Ming's legs grew wider and the green veins on his skin started bulging. He then changed into a green shadow and dashed away. Papier. The two white threads changed into long webs that were a few feet long and fell on the spot where Liu Ming used to be. Two golden gas balls also roared through, but all the attacks caught nothing. On the opposite side, the disciple with the fair skin showed some seriousness on his face. In that instant, a great pang sound was heard. One of the disciple who had just used his spider silk technique, knelt down on the floor with his face flushed red. Liu Ming pulled out his hand which was surrounded by dark wisp of gas from the caved-in stomach of the disciple and used a hand sword to knock on the neck of the disciple. Immediately, the disciple fainted on the ground. Liu Ming had used the lighten technique and another mortal secret technique to increase his speed. Within seconds, he had reached the disciple and gave him two deadly blows to incapacitate him. "Liu Jr., you brat, I will kill you." The disciple standing on the opposite side, who had a big head, shouted angrily when he saw his partner being beaten up by Liu Ming. He pulled out a black steel ruler and threw it toward Liu Ming with all his power. The yellow light on the steel ruler blinked as a strong invisible power dashed toward Liu Ming. But with a twist of the body, Liu Ming successfully evaded the strike of the strong invisible power. Seeing this, the disciple was also startled. Right when he thought about calling his practitioner's weapon back, it was already too late. A fist with strands of dark gas struck the disciple's stomach. Within seconds, the disciple knelt to the ground and was unable to move. Both of these barbarian ghost sex disciples were about 20 years old, but they were still middle spirit apostles. It was clear that their training talent wasn't the highest. When both of the disciples saw that Liu Ming was still young, and knew that Liu Ming had just entered the sect, they looked down on him. This caused them to fall to the lightning-quick strikes of Liu Ming when he used both lighten technique and a mortal secret technique to increase his speed. You are a body cultivator." When the fair-skinned disciple in front saw his companions getting beat up by Liu Ming within seconds, his face clearly showed that he was terrified and he lost his voice when he spoke. "Body cultivator, perhaps." When Liu Ming heard this, his heart moved. However, he slowly walked toward his opponent, without showing any expression on his face. "Humph, it doesn't matter even if you are a body cultivator, how strong can you be at your age?" The disciple with fair skin rolled his dark eyes and calmed himself. A golden ring on his hand suddenly turned blurry and transformed into a golden light shield in front of him. At the same time, the disciple used a one-handed sign and started to chant. In an instant, a strand of blue light shot out and a half-foot-long crystal icicle formed. After forming, it started rapidly spinning on the disciple's hand. Seeing this, Liu Ming's pupil slightly shrank. With some energy, he stomped down and changed into a green shadow, shooting up. When the disciple with fair skin saw Liu Ming's movement, his face showed ruthlessness. With a flick of his wrist, the icicles shot out with a frozen light. With the strength of the icicle technique and the unique freeze that accompanied it, if Liu Ming were to be hit by it, he would definitely become severely wounded, he might even die. But Liu Ming, who was rushing forward with high speed, ignored the projectile and instead twisted his waist. Instantly, his body became like a snake, without bones swaying vigorously. The icicle brushed past Liu Ming's shoulder. At this moment, the face of the fair-skinned disciple turned crafty and he changed his hand sign immediately and spit out the word explode from his mouth. Peng, the icicle blinked and scattered into many pieces of blue ice. A freeze started to diffuse in the air. Liu Ming became startled and, without thinking too much, he vigorously flicked his wrist. A round light shield appeared and went to protect his shoulder. Still, Liu Ming's action was too late. Liu Ming felt his shoulder freeze and become numb. His shoulder was now covered by a thin layer of icy frost which slowed his pouncing body. The fair-skinned disciple sneered. Next, he changed his incantation and spit out a thick white thread which turned into a 12 feet long web from his head. The web came rushing toward Liu Ming's head. Even though it was the same spider silk technique, in the hands of the fair-skinned disciple, the power difference was huge compared to when it was used by the other two disciples. Liu Ming suddenly stopped and stood on the spot. He stared at the web as it was dropping down at him. He gave a fast mumble and swung both of his hands. Two fireballs, the size of a fist, instantly shot out. One of the fireballs dashed at the web while the other flew toward the fair-skinned disciple who was standing just a few feet away. Peng! Before the web fell, it had been burned to ashes. The disciple was terrified and immediately charged his practitioner weapon, which was in the form of a light shield with folly. Even though it was just a normal fireball, with such a short distance, the disciple could not completely ensure that his practitioner weapon could block the fireball. With a hong, sparks flew in front of the fair-skinned disciple. As for the light shield, after some vigorous shaking and some rattling noise, a couple of fine cracks appeared. When the disciple saw this, his heart felt a bit relieved. As he was about to attack Liu Ming once again, he felt a tightening on his waist. A black rope had been twinned around him without him knowing. Soul shackling chains. When the disciple with fair skin saw this, the color drained from his face. He shook the golden fighting glove practitioner weapon on his hand, wanting to do something, but it was already too late. The black rope was like a venomous snake that twined speedily around the disciple's waist and tightened up. Dark gas started to seep out from the rope, and after he felt a huge pain in his waist, the disciple was unable to move. Liu Ming then walked toward the disciple arrogantly. Without saying anything, he aimed the neck of the disciple and gave a knock to make the disciple faint instantly. Liu Ming let out a breath and used the dark bone method to accumulate his folly to his shoulder. As a result, dark smoke appeared, and under it, the thin layer of frost on Liu Ming's shoulder melted. In an instant, there was nothing left. Chapter 44, The Fight for the Spirit Fruits. Liu Ming looked at the unconscious disciple with fair skin lying down at his feet and let out a sigh. There was a great difference between the fight with these cultivators and the previous fights that he had experienced. A simple icicle technique transformed into something out of his expectations. What was even more alarming was that his opponent was just a middle spirit apostle who probably did not practice many secret techniques. If Liu Ming had faced someone who had cultivated longer, or a spirit apostle who had a strong spell or secret technique, it would be even more tough for Liu Ming to win. After reminiscing about how dangerous it was to win fights between cultivators, Liu Ming exercised his shoulder slightly. Ensuring that everything was all right, he started to search the three disciples for their valuables. After a careful search, Liu Ming found 3 practitioner weapons, more than 30 spirit stones, half a bottle of pills of fastening, and some odd materials. Some of the materials looked like medical herbs while others were some unknown bones. Liu Ming packed all these things together and carried them on his shoulder. He then rose up and flew back to the barbarian ghost sect. Half a day later, when Liu Ming had once again entered the second floor of the sect's duty hall, the hall was filled with people. However, half of the people were squeezed in front of the crystal task monument and were talking about something on the monument. When Liu Ming saw this, he felt curious. However, he was not hasty to walk over and instead walked toward a stone table on the other side. He then placed his fish basket on the stone table. A middle-aged enforcer quickly looked into the fish basket. He then nodded his head and praised. "Not bad, this is the real eagle beak fish. Although Junior Bai is still young, recently you have completed quite a number of missions. I have good expectations for you, Junior. Keep working hard." At the same time, the enforcer took the nameplate of Liu Ming easily. He then touched the nameplate with a golden stick and threw out a bag filled with spirit stones. "Thanks for your praise, Senior. What is the new mission? Why were there so many seniors gathered around?" Liu Ming asked with a smile as he took back his nameplate and the bag. He. The task is from Marshal Uncle Bai from Poisonous Spirit faction, who needs a few number of disciple to look after his forge. The contribution point reward is almost negligible when compared to the other reward of having a chance to learn the art of alchemy. That is why so many people are interested in it. In addition, Marshal Uncle Bai is also the best alchemist in our barbarian ghost sect. The middle-aged enforcer said while sarcasm dripped off his face. Senior, is there some trickery? Liu Ming asked when he saw the enforcer's face. He, Junior can look back and see what kind of people are lining up to take the chore. The middle-aged enforcer said while slightly laughing. Liu Ming heard these words and was a bit surprised. Turning his head, Liu Ming looked back. After a while, Liu Ming could not help but show surprise on his face as the middle-aged enforcer started speaking again. Marshal Uncle Zhang gave out several chores like this before and there were, who knows how many disciples who went to take it, but there was not a single person who actually completed it. The disciples who went complete the chore, besides being scolded fiercely by Marshal Uncle Zhang and wasting several months, did not even receive anything on the art of alchemy. Therefore, when this mission gets posted again, it gets ignored by older disciples. Only those young juniors think that they have a chance at becoming an alchemist and attempt it. So that is how it is. Thank you senior for your advice. Liu Ming realized the truth behind the mission. Although the enforcer did not say much, Liu Ming clearly realized that this Marshal Uncle Zhang from the poisonous spirit faction was not someone who could be served easily, so he gave up on the thought of taking this mission. Failure of the mission could be acceptable, but wasting several months was definitely not worth it. From before, Liu Ming had realized that alchemists, spirit formation masters, spirit plant masters, and spirit beast masters were people who had special abilities and were greatly popular in the cultivation world. The alchemists were the rarest of all these groups and were absolutely essential to a section. Deep in Liu Ming's heart, he was definitely interested in becoming an alchemist. After all, if Liu Ming was an alchemist then he could have refined the huge green rat's meat into pills and consumed them for the greatest effect. As Liu Ming thought of the potential benefits for an alchemist as he left the stone table. When he passed by the crystal monument, he glanced upward and quickly found the mission posted by the Marshal Uncle Zhang. Like the words of the middle-aged enforcer, tending the forge for 3 months would result in 100 contribution points and knowledge of alchemy. However, there was an extra condition of having to meet the standards of Marshal Uncle Zhang or else none of the rewards would be given. Liu Ming grinned at the new disciples who all looked excited and left the duty hall without hesitation. He then started flying far away. In the next 2 months, Liu Ming did not leave the 9-infant mountain and instead focused on cultivating the dark bone method. One day, Liu Ming who was cultivating in his room suddenly felt his body lighten. In addition, a feeling that made his soul tremble was emitted from his dantian. Instinctively, Liu Ming opened his mouth and started roaring. Liu Ming's roar was like the waves of an ocean, unceasing and overlapping. After half the time it took to drink a cup of tea, Liu Ming finally stopped. With anticipation, Liu Ming started to examine himself and feel the abundant folly in his body. He had finished the 2nd level of the dark bone method and was finally a middle spirit apostle. At the same time, in a hall at the peak of the 9-infant mountain, the scholar spirit master listened attentively to the roar and after hearing it stop, he smiled to the shaggy-haired spirit master opposite of him. From the intensity of this roar, it seems as if a disciple of our sect has successfully become a middle spirit apostle. Quite good luck for our faction. This might even be a foreshadowing of the success of what will happen. I hope so too. I never knew that something I did so carelessly would bring our faction such an opportunity. However, because of my lack of enthusiasm and effort back then, those 2 geezers will definitely not be content in following our agreement. Hearing this, Zhu Qi bitterly smiled. Unless they don't want to keep the face of the 9 Enlightenment Mountain, I want to see how they will open their mouths to break our agreement. After all, they proposed this in the first place. Marshal Aunt Joan who was also sitting to the side lifted her eyebrows as she spoke. Break our agreement? Those 2 are spirit masters with a reputation to keep. They wouldn't do such a low thing. However, if they proposed some other requirement, it's hard for us to reject it. Zhu Qi said slowly. What? Junior Zhu, did you receive any messages? Hearing this, Gui Ryu Quan looked toward Zhu Qi. Yes, right before I came, I received a letter from a disciple of the Nine Enlightenment Mountain. Senior Gui and Junior Zhong might as well look at it. Zhu Qi sighed as he flicked his wrist and took out a faint yellow scroll. Afterward, he threw it at the scholar. After catching it, Gui Ryu Quan immediately started looking through it. However, after a couple of seconds, Gui Ryu Quan's face darkened. Seeing this, Zhong's spirit master also showed curiosity. Junior, come look at it. The scholar finally gave the scroll to his junior and closed his eyes to meditate. What? They actually requested to have a competition for those spirit fruits? And the participants can only be new disciples that have not been in the sect for 3 years yet? Aren't they taking advantage of how our disciples haven't been training for very long? The Nine Enlightenment Mountain is known for their puppet techniques, and as long as their disciples have 1 or 2 powerful puppets, their strength will immediately increase. How can our faction's disciples fight with them? After reading the letter, Zhong's spirit master immediately flew into a rage. The spirit fruit trees are under their control. In addition, according to my understanding, the new disciples in the Nine Enlightenment Mountain are only 1 year older than our disciple. Finally, they even agreed that their disciples would not use any puppets above the 3rd tier. Zhu Qi said. However, we only have 5 new disciples. In addition, only Xiao Feng has advanced to become a middle spirit apostle. How can the other disciples even contend against them? Spirit Master Zhong quickly asked. Hearing this, Zhu Kai's brows furrowed. Humph, since they are providing the details, we definitely have room to argue. We definitely can't have 5 fights with them. So respond by telling them that we will have 3 fights. This way, no matter how bad we are, we will have the chance of getting 1/3 of the spirit fruits. Gui Ryu Quan opened his eyes and said forcefully. 3 fights? That's a good idea. With Fen Er's strength, there is quite a high chance of winning 1 match. Hearing this, a smile surfaced on Zhu Kai's face. What about the other 2 matches? Who do send? Do we just forfeit them? The Zhong spirit master cried out. For the other 2 people. Yu Cheng has been training quite hard recently. Why don't we count him? As for the other person, the disciple called Bai Chongtian, who has been at the beginning spirit apostle level since half a year ago. At the least, he should have a bit more folly, and he does have some experience in fighting. Even if both of them lose, it's fine. As long as one person wins, we will have earned a lot. Gui Ryu Quan said after a slight thought. Both Spirit Master agreed after hearing Gui Spirit Master's words. After discussing finer details for a while, Gui Ryu Quan took out a blank scroll and quickly wrote a reply. Then, he beckoned for a disciple and gave the return letter to him. A while later, a grey cloud rose up from the Nine-Infant Mountain and left the barbarian ghost sect. The direction it was flying in was toward the Nine Enlightenment Mountain. Half a month later, Liu Ming, who was still trying to comprehend the 3rd level of the Dark Bone method, suddenly heard a clear male voice from outside his room. Junior Bai, are you there? I'm here to call you up the mountain per request of teacher. The voice's owner was Shi Chuan. Chapter 45, Competition and Spirit Elixir. Once Liu Ming heard this, he became stunned for a second. He then answered as he left the room, entering the small courtyard. With a glance, Liu Ming saw Shi Chuan and the red-haired youth beside him, Yu Cheng, standing outside the courtyard. When Yu Cheng saw Liu Ming come out, he had a complicated expression on his face. Senior Shi, is Teacher Gui looking for me? Liu Ming asked as he walked across the courtyard. Not only is it Teacher Gui, but Martial Uncle Ji and Martial Aunt Zhong are also waiting for you and Junior Yu at the hall on the mountain peak. Shi Chuan spoke with a smile, but his complexion changed after he sharply looked at Liu Ming. He then exclaimed, Junior Bai, you advanced to a middle spirit apostle. Since Liu Ming had just become a middle spirit apostle, he was unable to freely control his folly. Thus, by his folly fluctuations, his actual level was seen through immediately by Senior Shi. Senior's perception really is sharp. I have indeed just recently reached middle spirit apostle, just a few days ago. Liu Ming didn't intend to hide anything, so he calmly confirmed it. As soon as Shi Chuan heard this, although he was usually unflustered, he still couldn't refrain from revealing an expression of surprise. As for Yu Chen, who was beside Shi Chuan, he was dumbstruck after hearing Liu Ming's response. So Junior is actually a genius at training, reaching the middle spirit apostle in the short time period of a year. This training speed is perhaps on par with Xiao Feng's training speed. It took a while before the shocked expression of Shi Chuan disappeared from his face. With a forced smile, Liu Ming calmly replied, "How can I be regarded as a genius at training? I only borrowed and utilized external powers and was lucky enough to improve so quickly and reach the middle spirit apostle level. Junior Bai is too modest. Even if Junior really did consume some type of folly increasing pills, a middle spirit apostle and a beginning spirit apostle are vastly different. The beginning spirit apostle level only requires you to have enough folly, which anyone can easily have, but there is a bottleneck to becoming a middle spirit apostle. According to what I know, many 3 spiritual pulse disciples are caught in the beginning spirit apostle stage for many years without improvement. At the same time, Junior Bai's reliance on the power of pills to improve folly isn't a smart idea. Folly still requires one to slowly train in order to have good purity, and if you ever reach a bottleneck in the future, the pure folly will make the resistance of the bottleneck much lower." After listening to what Liu Ming said, Shi Chuan showed an expression of understanding. Afterward, he shook his head and spoke seriously. Once Yu Cheng heard what Shi Chuan said, he also revealed an expression of understanding. Shi Chuan obviously attributed Liu Ming's training speed to pills that could increase one's folly. In the barbarian ghost sect, there were indeed several types of pills that could increase one's folly, but they only had an effect on spirit apostle disciples, and the amount of contribution points needed to exchange for them was frightening. There were few disciples that were willing to exchange for them. After all, if there wasn't a bottleneck during their spirit apostle stage for the majority of disciples, as long as they spent a certain amount of time training and cultivating, their folly would slowly increase without fail. However, when they did reach bottlenecks, consuming folly increasing pills would be completely useless. Therefore, with the importance of sect contribution points, their points were naturally saved up for other things. Of course, relying on pills to increase folly, was indeed like what Shi Chuan said. They were incomparable to the purity of self-cultivated folly. But when Liu Ming ate the remains of the giant rat and converted the remaining energy in the meat into his own folly, he did not suffer from these consequences. After all, the folly in the flesh was cultivated by the monster itself, and for it to remain in the body without scattering after the monster had died, the purity of the folly was definitely extremely high. But to simply rely on monster remains to increase folly was much more unreliable compared to the method of relying on pills. Since only consuming the remains of a monster with a higher level than oneself would have an effect on increasing folly, but when actually fighting a monster this strong, the matter of who was going to be eating who was not something so easily determined. Also, if one ate a lot of monster remains, there would also be other after effects and consequences. Even if there's someone that was willing to try cultivating by consumption, monsters in the kingdom of De Xian were just simply too rare, and high spirit master level monsters were extremely rare and few in number. After looking through several books, Liu Ming naturally knew about this, but after seeing the two misunderstand him he just smiled and didn't bother to further explain the situation. Since all of the remains of the green-haired giant rat had already been consumed, there was nothing other sect members could do even if they found out. However, not having them find out was naturally better. Many thanks for the advice, Senior. I will definitely engrave it in my memory. Anyway, I wonder why Teacher Gui is looking for Junior you and me. Could Senior spare me a bit of detail? Liu Ming replied vaguely and curiously asked. I am actually quite unsure, I just know that it has something to do with 9 Enlightenment Mountain. Other than you two, Junior Xiao Feng was also called to go. Shi Chuan replied with some hesitation apparent in his voice. 9 Enlightenment Mountain. Liu Ming heard what was said and felt surprised. The 9 Enlightenment Mountain was one of the 5 great sects of the Xian Kingdom, with its strength ranked above the barbarian ghost sect. Other than knowing that they seemed to be extremely proficient at puppet techniques, Liu Ming did not know anything else about that section. Still feeling a little surprised, the 3 of them flew into the sky on clouds and went straight for the mountain peak. After a short while, Liu Ming, Yu Cheng, and Xiao Feng all arrived in the hall. Not too far in front of them, the 3 spirit masters sat in separate chairs. However, the Gui scholar unhappily stared at Liu Ming, who had exceeded his expectations and had become a middle spirit apostle. His brows were tightly knit and only after a long time did he shake his head and say, "You actually utilized pills to reduce your training time, this has made me slightly disappointed. However, for what I am about to tell you, this is actually an unexpected, pleasant surprise. So I will not say any more. Junior Zhu, tell the 3 about this matter." At this time, Marshall and Zhong also looked at Liu Ming with disappointment in her eyes. Within the 3 spirit masters of 9 Infant Mountain, only Marshall and Zhong regarded Liu Ming with slight importance. With the misunderstanding that Liu Ming had consumed pills to improve quickly to become a middle spirit apostle, she naturally felt disappointed. The reason for calling you 3 over is because of an agreement between De Shang and De Ji of the 9 Enlightenment Mountain and us back in the day. After hearing what his senior had said, Zhu Qi slowly started to explain. Originally, 7 or 8 years ago, Zhu Qi and the Marshal and Zhong were invited by 2 spirit masters of the 9 Enlightenment Mountain to go together to some place of danger to explore the unknown. In the end, they found a fruit tree covered with unknown spirit fruits. However, these spirit fruits had just formed not long ago and were far from being ripe. Thus, they made an agreement with each other, once the fruits had become ripe, they would split the spirit fruits evenly. However, a few days ago, the 2 of them had received a letter from a 9 Enlightenment Mountain sect disciple stating that these soon-to-be ripe fruits would be split based on battles between the newly accepted disciples. And after haggling between 9 Infant and 9 Enlightenment Mountain Spirit Masters, they finally decided to hold 3 competitions. The 3 of them, Liu Ming, Yu Cheng, and Xiao Feng were the disciples that the 9 Infant Spirit Masters had chosen to participate in these competitions. Although these competitions are not battles of life or death, since these competitions are connected to the spirit fruits, no one will want to easily give them up. Thus, it is life-threatening to a certain degree. If any of you do not want to participate, you can say so now and us 3 will not force you to participate. Also, since we are having you fight, you will naturally receive benefits too. After carefully investigation through manuscripts, we have discovered that the fruits on the tree are the legendary sky jade fruit. The main use for this fruit is to create a type of spirit elixir, which is extremely helpful to low-level cultivators. Spreading this spirit elixir on the body has an astonishing effect of remolding one's body. If you do compete, as long as we win, you will receive the spirit elixir as a reward. Of course, for the disciples that win, your share will be much greater. Zhu Ji finally said. I am willing to compete in this battle. As soon as Zhu Qi finished talking, Xiao Feng yelled out without the slightest hesitation. He, who had just become a middle spirit apostle, was already extremely confident about his abilities. His confidence definitely was not inferior to any other spirit apostle of the same level. I am also willing to fight for our faction. Yu Cheng also seemed eager. Liu Ming was not going to give up such a great chance for his cultivation path either. After a slight pause after Yu Cheng, he too expressed his willingness to compete. Very well, you 3 are the most outstanding disciples out of our new disciples. However, the disciples from the 9 Enlightenment Mountain will not be easy to defeat. So for the next month, you three are to temporarily stay at the mountain peak and familiarize yourselves with battle methods effective against people who specialize in puppet techniques. We three will personally teach you. This way, your chances of winning will be able to increase by a bit. After hearing their replies, Goeryu Quan spoke with satisfaction. After Liu Ming and the 2 others heard this, they naturally all nodded continuously in agreement. As a result, for the following month, Liu Ming and the 2 others stayed at the mountain peak in some training ground. Each day, they would battle against some low-level puppets. Although Goeryu Quan and the other 2 did not have in-depth knowledge about the puppet techniques, controlling a few low-level puppets and replicating some of the more common attacks used by the puppet technique was not a big hassle for them as they were spirit masters. The different types of attacks from different types of low-level puppets, as well as the myriad of attacks puppet technique practitioners had, caused Liu Ming and the other 2 to broaden their scope of possible cultivation attacks. Of course, in these types of practices, Liu Ming did not use all of his different attacks and tricks. Instead, he performed averagely within the 3, not making Goeryu Quan pay extra attention nor make them feel disappointed. A month passed in the blink of an eye. Today, Liu Ming and the other 2, as well as Spirit Master Scholar and the Spirit Masters all arrived at the square. Only after Zhu Qi said a few words of farewell to the Spirit Master Scholar did he take out a faint yellow glyph while forming a hand sign with one hand. He then threw the glyph in front of himself. After a puff of white smoke, a 70 to 80 feet long green, wooden boat appeared in front of everyone. The boat was long and narrow and dark green in color, with a weird, light silver color pattern all over the green paint, giving people a mysterious feeling. Haha, with Junior Zhu's flying jade spirit boat, traveling won't take up too much time. Once Goeryu Quan saw the green-colored, wooden boat, he immediately mentioned something about it while playing with his beard. Yes, if it weren't for Senior Zhu accidentally discovering 1,000-year jade spirit wood and spending such huge costs to invite Master Yu to spend 3 years of his time, how could it be possible for us to obtain a flying totem? With this totem, as long as one doesn't fight anyone proficient in escape techniques, then one will be more than able to escape. The martial Ant Zhong said while smiling sweetly. Chapter 46, Suppressing Serpent Dragon Island. Upon hearing this, Liu Ming and the other 2 couldn't help but stare at the wooden boat in front of them. This was their first time seeing a totem, and an extremely rare flying totem at that. Zhao Qi called out to them as he boarded the wooden boat with Marshal Ant Zhong. This time, Goeryu Quan was not coming with them, since he had to watch over 9 Infants Mountain. Zhu Qi waited until Liu Ming and the other 2 disciples carefully boarded the wooden boat before forming a one-handed sign. Immediately, a single layer of an aqua-colored light screen appeared, enveloping the entire boat. Zhu Qi immediately continued shooting several different types of hand signs onto the boat's exterior, making it slowly rise into the air. After Zhu Qi said go, the wooden boat immediately shot forward, making the 3 spirit apostles seated inside sway as they almost fell over. Only when Liu Ming lowered his center of gravity did his body stand up straight again. Thereafter he quickly looked out at the aqua-colored light screen. The white clouds outside the boat quickly passed by at a speed observable with the naked eye. At the same time, the tall mountains beneath them became nothing more than small, black and green dots. It was simply impossible to see anything clearly at the speed which they were traveling. This flying jade spirit boat was actually several tens of thousand feet high in the sky while traveling at an astonishing speed. It was as if it were shooting through the sky. Even with the jade spirit boat, it will take a dozen or more days to get to our destination. During this period of time, other than when we temporarily land in a few places, you all should properly rest in the boat. After saying this, Zhu Qi walked to the front deck of the boat and stood there without moving, wholeheartedly controlling the boat as it advanced. After hearing that, Liu Ming and the 2 others sat down and crossed their legs in succession. As for Marshal Ant Zhong, Ever since she entered the wooden boat, she sat with her legs crossed in a corner at the back of the boat. Her eyes were slightly closed as she completely ignored the outside world. Liu Ming wasn't actually cultivating with the time. Instead he placed his hand on his knees, with lines of words and chants floating through his head. These words were the explanations on how to practice the spirit communication technique. Although Liu Ming did not have the spirit incense with him, a few days ago, he had managed to understand a large portion of the technique. All he needed now was to completely understand it, and then he could go find a suitable ghost and use the spirit communicate technique to tame it. This technique was the main combat technique used by barbarian ghost sect disciples. To his side, Yu Cheng had faintly closed eyes. His red hair slightly breezed about while at the same time there was a bit of a heat wave spreading outward. This odd heat wave was likely not the result of an entrance cultivation method and instead seemed more like Yu Cheng was training at some type of secret technique. As for Xiao Feng, his body was enveloped by a layer of faint green light, obviously cultivating his withering wood method that was passed down to him by Spirit Master Gui. Since Xiao Feng, like Liu Ming, had just become a middle spirit apostle, he needed to do extra strengthening on his new level. Time passed by bit as the flying jade spirit boat carrying the 5 of them became a ball of green light, shooting through the sky and flying to the west. During the journey, at nighttime, they would find an area of clear wilderness where they could stop and rest for a few hours. The rest of the time was spent aboard the spirit boat. There were no problems during the trip, and after a period of 10 days, the flying boat finally arrived at a lake that stretched as far as the eye could see. Without hesitation, the boat flew toward the center of the lake. At this time, the flying boat had already descended to an altitude of less than 1,000 feet. The water ripples caused by the soft wind blowing on the lake could now clearly be seen by the people on the boat. After the time it takes to drink a cup of tea, 10 minutes, a green and black island could be faintly seen up ahead. Ed note: is it just me, or does the author really not want people who don't drink tea know how long it takes for him to reach an area? Okay, we have finally arrived at Slaying Dragon Island. You all should prepare for landing. Zhu Qi said as he stood up and looked at the island ahead. After Liu Ming and the others gave an affirmation that they heard him, they stopped their training and stood up as well. The flying jade spirit boat soon arrived in the sky above the island and stopped at the center of the island. Liu Ming looked down and saw a pile of grayish-white rocks. The area directly under them also seemed to have about a dozen shadows. The flying jade spirit boat quivered a bit and the light screen on the surface suddenly disappeared as it slowly started descending. Haha, fellow Zhu, fellow Zhong, you have finally arrived. We haven't seen each other for such a long time, but after seeing you two today I see that the elegance and grace in the two of you is still the same as before. The flying boat landed on the ground and from nearby, a white-haired elder immediately walked out among the dozen people waiting. He was amiable in appearance and greeted Zhu Qi and the Zhong spirit master with a smile. Zhi Qi walked out of the wooden boat first and looking ahead, plainly said fellow De Ji also looks just as young as before, with no decrease in vigor. However, you brought quite a lot of disciples with you this time. Is it possible that they all want to compete? How is that possible? Since we have already decided that the competition will have 3 rounds, we will naturally only send 3 disciples to compete. The other disciples are just those who were originally left here, responsible for looking after the tree. They have stayed here for 7 or 8 years, even if they aren't rewarded, they should still be recognized for their efforts. A gray-haired elder wearing a wooden crown, not standing with the 9 Enlightenment Mountain group, spoke without expression. After Marshal Ant Zhong heard what was said, she instead snorted and said, "Humph, why do I remember that originally, Senior Gui also wanted to leave a few disciples to guard this place as well. However, the 2 of you brought out plenty of excuses to make sure that your disciples would be the ones to train near the spirit tree. Training close to the spirit tree helps increase one's training speed, even more so than consuming common spirit rice. One's folly would also get somewhat naturally purified. Seeing how energetic all your disciples look, they must all have greatly increased their folly. She was currently leading Liu Ming and the other two as they flew off the flying boat. What fellow Zhong said is incorrect. If it was like what you said, why would we split the spirit fruit with you too? Back in the days, the cave where the suppressing serpent dragon master once lived was discovered by the two of us, and we also helped, in large part, with breaking the seal afterward. Oh well, why are we even mentioning the past? It can be said that we have been friends for many years, so we cannot get mad over some spirit fruit. Also, fellow Zhu has already accepted that the spirit fruit shall be split through battle, which shows that he should have some confidence. I also heard that Brother Gui has accepted a new 9-spirit pulse disciple. I do wonder who it is. The white-haired elder did not seem aggravated at all and instead casually explained. His gaze then swept over the 3 disciples. What fellow De Ji said is correct, there is no benefit to mentioning the past. Xiao Feng, come and greet the 2 elders, De Shang and De Ji. After thinking for a short while, Zhu Qi did not bother to say any more and waved behind him. I greet the 2 elders. Xiao Feng did not dare be neglectful as he hurriedly walked forward and bowed. Already a middle spirit apostle, he really is a genius. The De Shang and De Ji looked and analyzed Xiao Feng, they could not help but say a few words of praise. Zhu Qi waved his hand, allowing Xiao Feng to return and became more serious as he asked. I have also heard that the 2 of you have also acquired a very talented disciple after your last spirit awakening ceremony. I heard that this new disciple has the talent of being able to do multiple things at the same time. I wonder if you will allow me to see him doing multiple things at the same time. After hearing this, Liu Ming's heart suddenly quivered. Oh, fellow Zhu must be talking about UER. UER, come meet your 2 elders of 9 Infants Mountain. After hearing what Zhu Qi said, the white-haired elder De Ji laughed a bit, and also waved behind him at the group of disciples in the same manner. A youth wearing a blue robe, who also looked slightly gloomy, walked forward a few steps. Without showing any expression, he gave a greeting in the direction of the 2 spirit masters of 9 Infant Mountain from quite far away. Then, without saying anything, he returned to the group of disciples. This all made Zhu Qi and the other people slightly startled. Fellow Zhu, fellow Zhong, please do not be offended. Jin Yu, this child grew up by himself in the mountains. After that he devoted all of his energy to training, so he doesn't really understand matters about human interaction. He definitely did not mean any disrespect to the 2 of you. The white-haired elder hurriedly explained, but the manner in which he spoiled Jinyu was obvious to everyone. After hearing this, Zhu Qi knit his brows. After a long while did he finally force a smile and said, it seems like the child's talent of doing multiple things at once is really important to the 2 of you, otherwise you 2 would not say words like these. Whatever, Junior and I became spirit masters long time ago, we will not lower ourselves to argue with a new disciple. How about we first go have a look at the spirit tree, then decide the specific matters regarding the competition. If you want to see the spirit tree, that is naturally not a problem. Ye Feng, you will be leading the way. De Ji replied without the slightest hesitation and immediately gave out orders. A youth around the age of 20 immediately stood out and replied, turned around and walked toward a tall, large pile of rocks. Seeing this, Zhu Qi took out a faint yellow glyph and after waving it toward the flying jade spirit boat, a white light shone out of the glyph. The flying jade spirit boat started to blur and then disappeared under the white light. Only after this did Zhu Qi collect and store the glyph. He then brought Liu Ming and the others to follow behind the 9 Enchantment Mountain disciple in no hurry. When the group of people approached the giant rock pile that seemed to be at least 100 feet high, the youth leading the way raised a hand, formed a hand sign and hit it onto the rock pile. After a series of peculiar tremors, the rock pile in front of them disappeared without a trace. Replacing it was a huge stone house that seemed extremely old and weathered. To the side of the stone house, there were a few tall, big, old, badly damaged stone pillars. These pillars were slightly yellow in color, with a few blurred, unclear patterns, seemed to existed for a long time. Who would have thought, that after a few years of not visiting, this place would still be the same as when we first broke the seal? When Zhu Qi saw the wooden house, he softly coughed before speaking. That is natural, after all, it was the two of us who especially ordered the disciples guarding this place to not destroy anything here. Deji replied with a beaming smile. Humph, it seems that you still haven't given up on that thing. Marshal Antjoan coldly replied after she heard what was said. According to the investigation results from before, this place should be the last secret dwelling of the suppressing dragon master. It is reasonable to say that that thing should be hidden here. This time, the white-haired elder hesitated a bit, before speaking with some regret. This cannot be said so easily. Although the last time we came here, the gains were not small, the remains of the suppressing dragon master have never been found. Perhaps this place is only a slightly more important dwelling of his. Also, after all these years, it is unknown to us how many times the two of you have searched this place. If it really still had any treasures, how could you two not have found them? Zhu Qi said coldly. Chapter 47, Fighting with Spells, First. Maybe it's so. The old, white-haired man sighed, obviously not willing to dwell any longer on this topic. By this time, the group had already entered the stone house. After walking to a stone staircase leading down, they descended down. Liu Ming was following Zhu Qi closely, examining everything around him. The entire stone staircase was made of green rocks, and every few meters there was a stone sconce on the wall that lit up the area around it. After descending 300 feet down, the path in front of them opened up as they walked into a hall with pathways leading in all directions. All around this hall were several stone doors that had been broken open. However, the areas behind these doors were unknown. The youth leading the way turned left without hesitation and went into a tunnel. However, it was only a short time after that another hall appeared in front of them. This hall also had several tunnels connected to it. This place was a mini man-made underground maze. However, the disciples of the Nine Enlightenment Mountain had clearly explored this place before, and after leading Liu Ming and the others left and right as they walked through the passageways, they finally arrived at a red-violet bronze door. When Zhu Qi and Marshal Antjoan saw this bronze door, their composure slightly changed. Ka-cha! The bronze door was slowly opened by two Nine Enchantment Mountain disciples. Looking at how they were straining themselves, it seemed as if the door weighed tens of thousands of pounds. The moment the bronze door opened, a burning hot gust of air came rushing out. This made Liu Ming and the other barbarian ghost sect disciples flinch. When Zhu Qi felt the heat wave, he knit his eyebrows together. However, he walked in with Marshal Antjoan without hesitation. Liu Ming quickly followed behind Zhu Qi and entered through the bronze door. After looking at the surroundings, an expression of surprise showed on his face. The cavern behind the door was at least a few acres large. The ground was laid in solid green rock slabs. At the edges of these slabs were small, faintly red gems. In the middle of the cave was a decently tall, bright red tree. On it were 30 or so emerald green fruits, the size of one's fist. The entire tree was shrouded in a faint blue light, while the ground at the roots of it was dark red in color. Heat waves were continually emitted from this patch of ground and made everyone in the cave feel as if they were in a hot oven. However, both Zhu Qi and Marshal Antjoan did not seem surprised by this. Zhu Qi stared at the spirit tree for a few seconds before saying, "Looks like our prediction was correct. Soon after the spirit fruits mature, the volcano will erupt. It really is a pity about this spirit tree, since we would be able to get some sky jasper fruit after a few more years. If we didn't notice such a thing would happen, neither you nor I would have let the spirit tree go so easily. Needless to say, we also wouldn't be standing here and splitting the spirit fruits so amicably," Deji said with a smile. When the volcano erupts, the entire suppressing dragon island will be gone. In addition, this spirit tree was planted here a long time ago. Once its spirit roots aren't nourished by the volcanic magma, the tree will wither. Alright, I've already counted, there are 33 spirit fruits on the tree like before. No fruit has been lost. We should start talking about the competition. Zhong's spirit master said. Since it's our disciples fighting, it doesn't need to be too complex. How about this, since there are 33 spirit fruits, we can split them into 3 groups. Each group will have 11 spirit fruits and will be picked by the winner. Of course, since this is only a competition, either you or me can intervene in order to save a disciple from harm. However, intervening would basically mean that you have forfeited the round. De Shang, who had not talked much since the group arrived, spoke now. Looks like fellow De Shang has already thought this through. I do not have any objections. However, the two of you have already promised that no disciple of yours will be using a high-tiered puppet. If someone uses a puppet of 3rd tier or above, it also counts as a loss. Zhu Kai's eyes flashed as he replied. Of course. De Ji also agreed. After working out a few more details about the competition, De Shang sharply stepped down. His foot was at least a few inches within the ground. Then, his body blurred, and when he appeared again, an acre-wide circle had been drawn into the hard rock ground. Through this feat, De Shang, who looked old and senile, seemed to have not been made of blood and flesh. All right, leaving the circle and losing the capability to move are both counted as a loss. Now, each sect can send out their first disciple. De Shang slowly drifted back as he spoke without emotion. Just as his voice fell, a girl around 15 or 16 years old walked out from among the 9 Enchantment Mountain disciples. Her sleeves were rolled up while she had a yellow animal skin bag at her waist. Her hair was tied into 7 or 8 braids while her eyes were extremely bright and she seemed quite mischievous. Yu Chen, she is also a beginning spirit apostle. Why don't you go? Seeing the girl's strength, Zhu Qi called upon Yu Chen. This was not the time to use tactics. If they dared to send in a middle spirit apostle like Xiao Feng or Liu Ming, they would most likely be able to take this first round but at the same time, forfeit the other 2 rounds. This kind of action would ruin their reputation and forfeit their chances of getting more than 1/3 of the spirit fruits was definitely something that the 2 9 infant mountain spirit masters did not want. After answering him, Yu Chen walked into the circle with excitement. The moment he stepped foot within the circle, his aura grew while a layer of yellow light appeared around him. When the girl saw this, she smiled and dug around in the bag at her waist. Moments later, she threw out a round yellow ball made of dirt. After some creaking, the yellow ball expanded into a 6-foot-long black serpent the moment it hit the ground. From its segmented body and reflective scales, it was apparent the serpent was a puppet beast. Go. The girl made a hand sign with one hand and poked her head with the other. Then, she started controlling the puppet. The puppet swung its tail and slammed the ground before shooting like an arrow toward Yu Chen. Good. Under the instructions of the spirit master, Yu Chen was much more familiar with puppet beasts and was not afraid when the serpent came lunging at him. He calmly crouched down and pushed at the ground. On his arm, a couple of yellow spirit tattoos flashed into appearance. With a muffled sound, a large green stone slab rose up from the ground and acted as a stone wall in front of Yu Chen. Seeing this, the girl's expression changed slightly, but the black puppet serpent kept going straight and rammed into the stone slab. With a honk sound, the stone slab was completely shattered and became dust that scattered in the air. The black serpent was also pushed back and fell to the ground. However, once the puppet beast touched the ground, it suddenly opened its mouth and started glinting. The glints were actually needles the size of a cow's hair, they shot through the dust. With peng, peng sounds, they stabbed into something. Hearing this, the girl's face showed excitement. Her hand sign changed and was about to drive the puppet beast forward again when a yellow flash appeared above her head. A yellow stone, that was at least the size of a person's head, appeared after the flash ended and smashed down heavily. Surprised, the girl twisted her waist and narrowly dodged the falling rock that went by her shoulder. However, at this time, a sound of who appeared. A crimson fireball shot out without warning from the dust, and in an instant, it was near the face of the girl. With panic, the girl only had time to put one of her arms before her to block the attack. Hong! The fireball exploded and engulfed the girl within it. Ha ha! Yu Cheng laughed widely as he walked out from the dust. At the moment, his entire body was covered in a layer of thick dirt. The dirt layer acted like armor made from dirt. The needles that the puppet beast had shot out were all stuck in the dirt armor, leaving Yu Cheng unscathed. Seeing this, Liu Ming's brows raised up slightly while he was somewhat regretful that he couldn't learn such a technique. This technique was called Earth Armor Technique and was exclusive to the Earth Spirit method. Cultivators of other cultivation methods that wanted to learn it would not find much success and would instead be wasting their time. Senior, I think you're laughing much too early. A thread of anger came from within the fire. With a su, the fire was swept away by a violent gust of wind and the girl once again appeared in everyone's vision. However, at this time, there was a red-yellow shield before her arm that was held defensively in front of her and in her other hand was a crimson glyph. The glyph was sprouting a red light that covered the girl within it. In addition, the girl showed no signs of being burned or even hurt. When Liu Ming saw the glyph in the girl's hand, he showed an expression of surprise. Even though Liu Ming had only joined the cultivation world not too long ago, he knew the rarity of glyphs like the one in the girl's hand, which contains special techniques and spells. Other than a couple of glyphs that could be used over and over again, glyphs that only had a one-time use were rare, even for spirit masters. Avoiding fire glyph. The two of you have really spent a grand sum for this competition. Not only is the material for making this glyph extremely hard to find, a normal glyph maker has a success rate of less than 1%. How could your disciple obtain such a rare glyph? Seeing the glyph in the 9 Enchantment Mountain girl's hand, Zhu Kai's face became ugly. Haha, you two fellows have wronged us. This glyph was not from us. Do you know what the surname of this girl is? Deji wasn't surprised at this situation and asked with a laugh. What is it? Zhu Qi felt odd at the nonchalance Deji was showing. Her surname is Nan. Deji said proudly. Nan? Does this girl have some relation with Master Nan? Zhu Qi paused for a second before suddenly remembering something. Haha, fellow Zhu has finally understood. This girl is one of the more loved granddaughters of Master Nan. However, ever since she was young, she has loved puppet techniques, which is why she is under the two of us. Thus, having glyphs on her is extremely common. Deji slowly responded. Chapter 48, Fighting with Spells, 2nd. Master Nan's favorite granddaughter. Hearing Deji's words, Zhu Qi and Martial Ant Zhong revealed bitter smiles on their faces. Liu Ming, who was standing to the side, was extremely curious as to who this Master Nan was and what kind of person he was. When Yu Cheng saw that the girl was unscathed, he didn't feel down. Instead, he started quickly chanting while raising both of his hands. A light green wind blade flew from each of his hands. Afterward, he clenched his fists and pounced toward the girl. The girl on the opposite side saw this and decided not to use her puppet snake. Instead, she let out a humph sound as the round, yellow bamboo shield and the blood-red glyph in her hand disappeared in seconds. Replacing them were a couple of yellow glyphs. Casting them, 6 fireballs appeared in a line and shot out. Seeing this, Yu Cheng became extremely surprised. It was too late for him to dodge. The thick yellow dirt on him had made him much slower than before. The first 2 fireballs collided and dissipated with the 2 wind blades, while the third and fourth fireballs landed on him directly. With the 2 other blasts, Yu Chen was forced back against his will. However, when the fifth and sixth fireball arrived at almost the same time, Yu Chen barely managed to take out a short blade from his sleeve in time to split open one of the fireballs. However, the other fireball landed harshly on him. This time, Yu Chen let out a blood-curdling scream as the thick dirt layer on him shattered into pieces under the blazing fire. Immediately, the fire enwrapped Yu Chen within it. Ahem, this round, we have lost. A long sigh. Zhu Qi, who was outside the circle, flashed and appeared by the side of the red-haired youth. Immediately, he waved his sleeve to generate some large winds, blowing out the fire. Zhu Qi then looked deeply at the girl before turning around and leaving. As for Yu Chen, because of how timely Zhu Kai's intervention was, he did not suffer any major damage. Only his hair was really burned and his skin was covered in a layer of ash. He was actually only slightly red. It was just a couple of burn blisters, nothing serious. However, instead of showing pain, Yu Chen hung his head low when he followed Zhu Qi out of the circle. His defeat this time had been caused by the number of glyphs the Nan girl could take out and his own mistakes. He could have timely cancelled the ground armor technique, which made him extremely slow, and dodged many of the attacks. At the very least, he would have lost much slower. It must be known that when Yu Chen was practicing on the Nine-Infant Mountain, he never used the ground armor technique. He had originally wanted to use the technique as an ace up his sleeve, but it actually became the reason for his defeat. This made Zhu Qi a little annoyed at the red-haired youth. For the second round of the competition, the Nine Enlightenment Mountain did not send a disciple out immediately. Obviously, they were waiting for the Nine-Infant Mountain to send a disciple first before deciding who would go up. Chong Tian, you. Wait, Junior. For this round, let Fen Er go up. Marshal Ant Zhong originally wanted to send Liu Ming up, but Zhu Qi suddenly interrupted. Senior's meaning behind this is. Marshal Ant Zhong was slightly surprised by this decision. If we lose 2 in a row, the pressure on Fen Er might be too high. It seems that the other side wants to take all 3 rounds. Thus, if we send up Fen Er, they will send out the Jinyu kid. Why don't we go for it right now? Zhu Qi said. What Senior said does make sense. Fen Er, what do you think? Marshal Ant Zhong pondered for a moment before she nodded and turned around to Xiao Feng. Marshal Uncle, Marshal Ant, please be at ease. No matter what kind of puppet this Jinyu person brings out, I won't lose. Xiao Feng said confidently. Yes, you have mastered that technique. You should have quite a high chance of winning. Why don't you go up first? The Marshal Ant Zhong finally agreed. Securing approval, Xiao Feng smiled and walked up confidently. Zhu Qi and Marshal Ant Zhong quickly shot their gazes to the Nine Enchantment Mountain group. The disciples of Nine Enchantment Mountain parted and the youth called Jinyu walked out. Seeing this, the hearts of the two were raised involuntarily. According to the reports, in the opening spirit ceremony of the Nine Enchantment Mountain, this youth named Jinyu only had the talent of a 6th spiritual pulse disciple. However, his innate talent of doing multiple things at once made him more sought after than many 9 spiritual pulse disciples. After a huge fight, he was taken in by De Shang and De Ji and was viewed as their successor. Seeing the caring expression of the 2 spirit masters, Liu Ming smiled bitterly in his heart. It looked like the 2 did not have high hopes for him winning his round and instead, put all their hopes onto Xiao Feng. Otherwise, they would have at least asked for his opinion. This lack of attention to him was in part due to his acted performance in Nine Infant Mountain, but it still left a bad taste in his mouth. Do what you can. Otherwise, once I start getting serious, you won't have a chance. The moment Jinyu walked into the circle, he spoke these words as if they were a fact. Humph. That's what I wanted to say to you. Xiao Feng became enraged at these words and after a blur of his hands, a wind blade appeared in one of them. All right, then I won't be courteous. Jin Yu didn't change his expression at Xiao Feng's provocation and instead waved his sleeves. A green round ball, the size of one's fist, came rolling out. In an instant, it transformed into a 3-foot-tall green praying mantis puppet. The new puppet beast was slightly different from the black serpent puppet. Besides its 2 forearms looking extremely sharp, the rest of its body was covered in a light green glow. This made the puppet seem extremely agile. Green light mantis. You guys have actually given such a puppet to a new disciple. He probably won't even be able to utilize it well. Seeing the mantis puppet, Zhu Kai's face changed drastically. Hee, this green light mantis is indeed a little hard to create, but it is still a tier 2 puppet beast. As for utilizing the puppet, fellow Zhu does not need to worry about it. Jin Yu's talent of doing multiple things at once will definitely surprise you two later. De Shang said happily. Really? Then we will wait and see. I want to see how strong this tier 2 puppet beast, which is the hardest one to master from your sect, really is. Zhu Qi said with some contempt and stopped talking. Xiao Feng saw the puppet beast of the other party and waved his arm. Immediately, the green wind blade flew toward Jin Yu. In an instant, many different hand signs were performed to build up the strength within Xiao Feng's body and his skin became a bright emerald color. Peng peng. The 2 forearms of the green light mantis moved slightly and knocked away the wind blade attack. In response to the attack, Xiao Feng shook his arm and took out a green blade practitioner weapon that buzzed loudly. His face turned somewhat savage as he swung the blade at Jin Yu. A surprising scene appeared. After the swing of the green blade finished, it visibly dimmed. However, a bright light, a few feet in length, appeared and shot out. At the same time, Xiao Feng threw away the dimmed practitioner weapon and started making a hand sign. Immediately, his body started seeming somewhat hazy. Afterward, he started running at a dizzying speed around Jin Yu. Seeing this, Liu Ming narrowed his eyes. However, he didn't do that because he was impressed with Xiao Feng's speed like the other disciples were. Instead, he faintly saw some extremely tiny seeds fall out of Xiao Feng's sleeve as he ran. Jin Yu and his puppet only had to move slightly in order to dodge the seemingly powerful attack from Xiao Feng that left a large trench behind the puppet and puppeteer. After he looked at the running figure, he immediately laughed. Trying to compare speeds with me? Laughable. Green light, go. Right as Jin Yu's voice fell, the green light mantis puppet rubbed its 2 forearms together before turning into a green shadow and also shooting forward. Its speed was even greater than Xiao Feng, who was already sprinting. Seeing this, Xiao Feng was quite surprised. Before he could even react, the mantis puppet had already closed the distance and was ready to strike. The mantis puppet's forearms flashed a dozen times in a matter of seconds as strike after strike rained down on Xiao Feng. Even though Xiao Feng was extremely proud, his heart fell when he saw this attack. As he tried to dodge, he made a hasty hand sign. From Xiao Feng's sleeve came su noises as 2 green arrows came shooting out. However, all the mantis puppet did was pull back its forearms and easily shredded through the 2 arrows. Xiao Feng used this pause to create distance between him and the puppet. Immediately afterward, he changed his hand sign and started laughing wildly at Jin Yu. Kid, you are definitely dead now. Raining thorn technique. Right after Xiao Feng's words fell, the places in which he had run past suddenly shined brightly. Hundreds of black thorns sprouted out of the ground and grew toward Jin Yu, who was surrounded by the thorns. If this is your ace, it's funny. Seeing this, Jin Yu sighed and poked his forehead. With a su sound, the green light mantis returned to Jin Yu's side. Afterward, it spread its wings and started running circles around Jin Yu. However, it was too late. The black thorns were already in position to penetrate through the makeshift defense and were making sharp air whistles with their speed. Still, Jin Yu showed no emotions and stood as still as a rock. All he did was focus on his puppet beast. Suddenly, all the thorns were stopped. There were 4 mantis puppets surrounding Jinyu, and each of them defended the thorns in the direction they faced. With their forearms, they cut down all of the thorns that dared to try to get past them. Xiaofeng's gloating smile froze on his face. Chapter 49, Fighting with Spells, 3. After all of the black thorns had been destroyed, with a su sound, a green mantis puppet appeared in front of Xiaofeng like a demon. Its forearms moved to attack, changing into 2 light beams, slicing towards Xiaoyan like a dragon. Xiaofeng was shocked by the attack and did not have time to form any defenses. With determination, his arms started shining with a green light as they moved toward the forearms of the mantis. Stop it! Your withering wood method is only trained to level 2. You cannot use your body to block this kind of attack. Dang, dang. 2 sounds rang out. With a gloomy expression, Zhu Qi appeared before Xiaofeng. He flicked his finger left and right, dispersing the attacks. On top of that, the puppet was even forced to retreat several steps back after being struck. Seeing this, Jinyu's eyes flashed. At the same time, the green light mantis rubbed its 2 forearms together and was about to sprint forward. However, Deji appeared besides Jinyu and patted his shoulder to stop him from controlling his puppet. Afterward, he smiled and heard Zhu Qi say, "We have lost this round." The talent of doing multiple things at once is indeed extremely useful for your sex puppet techniques. With his performance, it can be said that even if you were to personally control this green light mantis, you wouldn't be doing much better. You two have truly found a suitable disciple. Zhu Qi looked deeply at Jinyu and sighed after admitting the defeat. Martial Aunt Joan, who was outside of the circle, also sighed when she heard Zhu Kai's word. It couldn't be said that Xiaofeng had done poorly, rather it was Jinyu's control of his puppets that was truly impressive. With the speed of the green light mantis, it was possible that if he attacked first, the other party would not even get a chance to cast a single spell or technique. Complete and utter defeat was now a fear come true for the 9 Infant Mountain. Thinking about their futile trip, Martial Aunt Joan bitterly smiled in her heart. At the same time, she turned her head toward Liu Ming. What entered her eyes gave her quite a surprise. Liu Ming didn't show any expressions of fear or insecurity. Instead, he quietly stood there as if the result of the 2 previous matches did not even faze him. Good. To be able to keep a clear mind at this point is extremely difficult. For the last match, you need not worry too much. Just do your best. When Zhu Qi brought back Xiaofeng, who had his unwillingness to accept defeat written all over his face, and saw how calm Liu Ming was, Zhu Qi also showed an expression of surprise and praised Liu Ming. "Yes, Martial Uncle Zhu, I will do my best." Liu Ming slightly bowed and respectfully replied. At this time, a 15 to 16-year-old youth that was well built walked out from the 9 Enchantment Mountain disciples. There was a long, blood-red scar on his forehead and 2 swords on his back. While he stood still in the center, he emitted a powerful and fierce aura. This aura? No way. This is a body cultivator. Deji, De Shang, is he really a disciple under the 2 of you? After sensing the aura of the well-built youth, Martial Aunt Joan changed her expression and questioned the 2 spirit masters with some panic in her voice. "Fellow Joan, Wu Fei is indeed a disciple that we took in during our opening spirit ceremony. He could withstand the pain of the ceremony using nothing but his own body and was one of the few disciples that wasn't forced to the ground. Even though our sect is known for our puppet techniques, it is not strange for some disciples to follow the path of a body cultivator." De Shang stroked his beard and said with a smile. The gloating manner in his eye was visible to anyone who bothered to look. The path of a body cultivator was not a path any spirit apostle could take. Not only did all of them have a body much stronger than normal cultivators, they could also withstand inhuman levels of pain without flinching. After all, every single one of them toughened their bodies through extremely painful and severe methods. For most spirit apostles, a body cultivator of the same level was a counter that they could not win against. Even in the spirit master realm, Body cultivators could, under certain circumstances, show powers that were not within the normal range of spirit masters. Thus, even though body cultivators were extremely hard to come by and develop, each of the large sects would choose a couple of disciples from every opening spirit ceremony to become one of these special cultivators. The disciples that De Shang and De Ji brought this time were indeed new disciples, but every single one of them had extraordinary skills or backgrounds that would leave them with an unimaginable advantage. Why would they have requested such a competition if they didn't have such an advantage? Seeing this, Zhu Qi could only bitterly smile and stay quiet. When he and Marshal Ant Zhong saw how calm Liu Ming was, they thought that there was some hope for the last round. However, after seeing Liu Ming's opponent, they no longer had any thoughts about winning the spirit fruits. When Liu Ming first experienced the fierce aura emitted by well-built youth, he furrowed his brow. However, he quickly relaxed and slowly walked up. The moment Liu Ming set foot within the circle, the well-built youth's expression became one of slight anger. His arms moved, pulling out the two swords on his back. At the same time, he started chanting and a golden luster started shining from all over his body. After a slight blur, his height grew a few inches, even his arms and legs seemed to have become thicker. With just a casual glance, he seemed like Liu Ming after he activated his mortal secret techniques. Seeing this, Liu Ming's eyes shone. He also started chanting and wisps of black smoke started to appear from within his body. The well-built youth lowly roared and the two swords were twirled like wheels in his hands. Afterward, he stomped onto the ground and charged forward in a flash. A fireball that was visibly larger than a normal fireball was shot out from Liu Ming and easily landed on the charging youth, who did not even attempt to avoid the attack. The folly in Liu Ming had all been refined and thus, with the same fireball technique, the fireballs that he cast would be stronger than the fireballs a normal spirit apostle made. With a hong the fire exploded into waves of flames, making the charging youth slightly pause. However, the well-built youth roared once more and the wind around his two blades strengthened and blew away all the flames. After dispelling the flames, the youth started charging again. In seconds he was already within 100 feet of Liu Ming. Seeing the fierce charge of the youth, Zhu Qi and Marshal Ant Zhong shared a bitter smile after seeing the hopelessness in each other's eyes. At this moment, the two of them held no hope for Liu Ming's victory. Pu. Another two crimson fireballs flew from Liu Ming's hands and landed on the charging youth. Even if the well-built youth's body was much stronger than the average person with such strong fireball attacks, he felt his arms becoming incredibly tired and he barely cleared the waves of flames around him. With panic, the youth realized that if he didn't defeat Liu Ming in this charge, he would most definitely lose. With a final roar, he squeezed out the final strength of his arms and cut open a path among the loose waves of flames around him. Then, he began to transform into a shadow, pouncing toward Liu Ming. The youth assumed that a person who had already released so many fireballs would not have time to cast any more spells. And, as a body cultivator, all he had to do was get into close combat with the other party to end the match. The well-built youth would reach Liu Ming in a matter of seconds, but he was still unable to find any trace of fear on Liu Ming's face. Instead, Liu Ming's lips curved into a mocking smile. Wait. The well-built youth suddenly felt that something was wrong the split second he saw Liu Ming's face. However, it was already too late for him to do anything. Liu Ming's lips parted as he raised his two hands. Another two crimson fireballs appeared and shot out. Hong, hong. After two sounds, the well-built youth's two swords flew out from his hands while his own body was pushed back and engulfed by the corresponding wave of flames. Initial mastery of the fireball technique. No, with such a fast cast time, it seems he's already entered the initial mastery of the fireball technique for quite some time already. The sudden turnaround of events left De Ji unable to control his voice. De Shang, on the other hand, had already rushed into the circle and waved away all the flames on the well-built youth. However, the power of the two fireballs was not something as simple as couple of flames. Even with De Shang's aiding hand, the well-built youth had burn wounds all over and was unconscious. Good, very good. I never would have thought that a new disciple would have such a mastery over the fireball technique. We lost without regrets. The folly in his body has also been refined, right? A normal spirit apostle's fireball technique doesn't have such strong power. Fellow Zhu and fellow Zhong, you both have really left the best for last. De Shang eyed the unconscious youth on the ground with some pain in his eyes while his gaze was cold as ice when he looked at Liu Ming. Haha, we're innocent. I didn't even know that this disciple of mine had practiced the fireball technique to such a high level. A shadow solidified beside Liu Ming and Zhu Kai's voice came booming across the circle. With a pat on Liu Ming's shoulder and an expression of surprise on his face, anyone could tell that Zhu Qi was more than satisfied with this turn of events. Marshal Ent Zhong also showed a face of pleasant surprise. The unexpected victory from Liu Ming was outside of their expectation, but more importantly, it made it so that their trip was not in vain. If they left empty-handed, the entire nine-infant faction would be in shame. As for how Liu Ming got his fireball technique to initial spell mastery and how pure Liu Ming's folly was, those were small matters compared to the spirit fruits. The gazes they showered Liu Ming with were also full of praise, and not full of questions. All right, 2 wins in 3 matches. You two can take 1/3 of the spirit fruits. However, I have a suggestion. Would you two fellows be interested in having one more round? De Ji waited until someone from the 9 Enchantment Mountain tended to the well-built youth before sweeping his gaze over Liu Ming and asked. What do you mean by this? The happiness on Zhu Kai's face dimmed. Marshal Ent Zhong also walked up with a stormy face and stood next to Zhu Qi. It's very simple. From what I saw, your disciple is quite strong. Why not have him go at another round with Jin Yu? If Jin Yu wins, then the spirit fruits that you have will go to us. However, if your disciple wins, we will give you our 2/3 of the spirit fruits. What do you two fellows think? No matter how you look at it, you fellows are in the advantage. De Ji and De Shang exchanged a glance, and as if he read De Ji's mind, De Shang spoke up. What? Gambling your 2/3 of the spirit fruits for our 1/3? Hearing this, Zhu Kai's heart started beating rapidly. Chapter 50, Mechanical Plating. No need, we two are already very happy with the current result, there is no need to continue. Marshal Ent Zhong suddenly opened her mouth and said. Indeed, Kong Tian, this child only won this match by a fluke. If he was against Jin Yu, the chances of victory are just too low. Zhu Chu also realized the intentions of the other two and directly declined. Even if the stakes were more weighted toward their side, if they couldn't win, it would naturally be useless. If so, how about we add another 50 kilograms of iron essence? After knitting his brows, De Ji unexpectedly raised the stakes again. After this was said, Zhu Qi was stumped for words, and Marshal Ent Zhong's expression froze. If I heard correctly, the two of you, for this final 1/3 of the spirit fruits, are actually willing to add on 50 kilograms of iron essence on top of the 2/3 of the spirit fruits. The price of 50 kilograms of iron essence is definitely not inferior to the price of all of these spirit fruits. After breaking out of his daze, Zhu Qi replied in disbelief. The truth is, fellow Zhu and fellow Zhong, this time, these spirit fruits are a necessity to us. Either we take none of them or we take all of them. As for the reason, we cannot tell you. However, both rest assured, if your disciple loses today, we are willing to leave behind the 50 kilograms of iron essence as compensation. The De Shang replied solemnly. Zhu Qi and Marshal Ent Zhong glanced at each other, both seeing the surprise in each other's eyes. Please wait a moment, I need to discuss this with my junior before deciding. Zhu Qi could only reply like this. This is natural, please do not hesitate to discuss, we too can wait. The De Shang naturally agreed without reservations. Kong Tian, take this time and rest. It is very possible you will compete again in a while. Marshal Antjean did not disagree, and instead turned around to speak with extreme gravity to Liu Ming. Yes. Liu Ming replied and sat down with legs crossed where he was standing. He then began circulating and recovering folly without making a sound. However, he was still naturally bewildered in his heart, not knowing what the two spirit masters of Nine Enlightenment Mountain were thinking. At this moment, Zhu Qi and Marshal Antjean walked to the other side, yet their lips were moving but no sound was produced. It was the extremely mysterious whisper technique. This technique could only be learned after reaching late spirit apostle level. Therefore, this was also the first time Liu Ming had seen it. After looking at it, he couldn't help but feel very curious. Ever since Liu Ming won by accident, the expression of Yu Cheng and Xiao Feng both became complicated. Especially Xiao Feng, who felt extremely embarrassed. He, who was a 9 spiritual pulse disciple, was not able to win a match. However, Liu Ming, who was a 3 spiritual pulse disciple, could get a round under his belt. Also, as it seemed that he was going to compete again, this obviously made him feel unwilling at heart. The gaze in which he used to look Liu Ming could not help but contain a hint of envy. After no less than the time it takes to drink a cup of tea, 10 minutes, Zhu Qi and Marshal Antjean finished discussing, and walked over again. After seeing this, De Ji and De Shang roused their spirit, ready to hear their reply. Since the two of you have agreed to give 50 kilograms of iron essence whether we win or lose, the two of us naturally cannot refuse. However, we have one condition. Zhu Qi spoke with no expression. What condition? De Ji and De Shang looked at each other as De Shang hurriedly asked. This competition, if our disciple loses, the two of us will naturally say no more and immediately leave this place with the iron essence. All the spirit fruit belonging to the two fellows. However, if he wins, then you two fellows must tell us the real reason as to why you care so much about these spirit fruits. Zhu Qi said without thinking any further. Tell you our reason? Sure, if we lose these spirit fruits, I naturally will have no need to continue hiding this information. After hearing what he said, De Ji's expression changed slightly, but after thinking about it, he opened his mouth and agreed. Okay, then it is a deal. Zhu Qi raised both brows and extended out a palm. With 3 sounds of pa pa pa, the white-haired elder and Zhu Qi hit their palms together. Afterward, the 4 spirit masters all walked out of the ring. Kong Tian, I don't know if you still have other methods, but feel free to use them all in the next round. As long as you can win against that kid called Jin Yu, I can make sure that the benefits you receive will be 1/10 of all the rewards. When Zhu Qi passed by Liu Ming, he suddenly turned serious and said a sentence. That is correct, as long as you win the match, I will definitely keep that promise. Marshal Antjean also seriously added a sentence. I understand and will definitely try my utmost. Once he heard he could receive 1/10 of all the rewards, Liu Ming's heart could not help but suddenly jump, and he hurriedly replied in a submissive manner. At this time, De Ji and De Shang were also instructing a few sentences seriously to Jin Yu before also leaving. Jin Yu entered the ring with no expression on his face, shook his sleeve and threw out a green-colored ball. Once again, the ball changed into a green light-praying mantis puppet. Junior, how do you feel about Kong Tian's chances of winning? Zhu Qi, standing outside the ring, suddenly asked Marshal Antjean. If it was before the previous match, I would only say that he had a 5% chance. But since his fireball technique has already reached initial spell mastery and moreover, he won the previous match effortlessly. He should still have other tricks up his sleeve that he has not used yet. But even if so, the chances of victory should only be at a maximum of 30%. After all, Jin Yu's talent of doing many things at the same time, combined with the green light-praying mantis puppets, is extremely powerful. Marshal Antjean remained silent for a moment, before giving her reply. 30%. This is enough for us to gamble. Looking at the manner of De Ji and De Shang, if we don't compete in this last round, perhaps they will not let us leave here easily. Zhu Qi replied with a cold laugh. I am actually more curious about why the two of them are so attached to these spirit fruits. The martial ant instead replied unhurriedly. He, if Kong Tian wins, we will naturally be able to know. But if it does not happen, taking back 50 kilograms of iron essence can also be considered as returning from a rewarding journey. Zhu Qi replied with a small chuckle. Indeed, all we can do now is patiently wait for the results. The martial ant nodded slightly. At this time, Liu Ming had already stood up and wisps of black smoke started escaping from his body. He then formed a sign with one hand. The bronze bracelet on his wrist lit up, and quickly Liu Ming hit a hand sign into his own body. At this, the bronze bracelet produced a weng sound, and a round light shield which tightly stuck to his arm appeared. So this is your practitioner weapon, doesn't seem like much. Jin Yu glanced at Liu Ming's bronze bracelet and coldly said. Whether it is powerful or not, you will know after trying it personally. Liu Ming stared at his opponent and spoke plainly. Oh really, then I will try it? An ominous glint flashed in Jin Yu's eyes, immediately pointing a finger toward his forehead. The green light praying mantis immediately knocked its two forelimbs together. Then, it suddenly opened up both its wings and lunged forward toward Liu Ming with a speed that left after images. After Liu Ming saw this, he quickly chanted a technique and brought both of his hands together in front of his chest. This immediately caused waves of aqua light to flash past, and one by one, thin, aqua-colored blades appeared in Liu Ming's hands at lightning speed. Then, Liu Ming flicked his wrists. Su 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 sounds echoed. 3 wind blades practically formed a straight light as they shot forward. The speed at which they were traveling was much faster than Liu Ming's fireball technique from before. It was even about the same as the speed of the green light praying mantis puppet. After seeing this, Jin Yu became slightly alarmed and hurriedly controlled the puppet beast. In between 3 sounds of dang dang dang, the forelimbs of the praying mantis danced at lightning speed. Although it deflected the 3 wind blades, it also couldn't help but consecutively take several steps back. Jin Yu's expression became heavy. With his empty hand, he suddenly formed a hand sign and pointed toward the praying mantis in the air. The puppet immediately rushed forward again. However, this time, it started trembling its wings at the same time and turned into 4 blurry shadows, which were indistinguishable between each other as they all rushed toward Liu Ming. Liu Ming's pupils shrank, but his chanting of his technique became even more hurried, again raising both hands. A deafening sound could be heard. Again, 4 wind blades shot out and destroyed 3 praying mantis shadows in a flash. The final mantis moved its forelimb, knocking the wind blade away, but its midair body was affected by the power of the wind blade and helplessly flew backward. Right at this time, Liu Ming suddenly raised his sleeve into the air. With a flash of black, a black rope flew straight toward the praying mantis puppet like a poisonous snake. Pu. Right when the unsuspecting praying mantis was about to get caught in the black rope, the puppet beast suddenly flapped its wing and shot to the side at an oblique angle. The black rope immediately missed its target. Taking advantage of the moment when Jin Yu was distracted, Liu Ming, who was on the other side, raised both hands. With another deafening sound, he shot forward another 2 wind blades, but not with the praying mantis puppet as the target now. Instead, after the shot forward with a flash, the wind blades were like ghosts as they appeared before Jin Yu. When Liu Ming fought previously, he impressively did not use his full power. With his pure folly and his complete spell mastering in the wind blade technique, the speed of Liu Ming's wind blades would be 30 or 40% faster than before if he were to give it his all. Even though Jin Yu had a coarse and wild personality, after seeing this situation he couldn't help but be frightened. However, he had no time to dodge even if he wanted to. Peng, peng. The wind blades landed solidly on the Jin Yu's front chest, but only caused a yellow flash and dull thud, as if they landed on dead wood. Mechanical battle armor. De Ji and De Zhang, You two actually gave this treasure to him, this round of competition cannot be counted. Zuchi, who was originally so happy that he could jump around, immediately yelled to the other two spirit master while feeling alarmed and angry at this scene. After Martial Aunt Zhong saw this situation, her expression also became unnatural and ugly. Humph, look carefully. UER's mechanical item is not our mechanical battle armor from before, but instead mechanical plating that was created by him. TL, UER is an affectionate name for Jin Yu. De Shang replied with a difficult smile and a white face. Obviously the scene that just occurred also gave him a great fright. Mechanical plating. After hearing this, Zhu Qi was slightly stumped for words. At this time, after snorting coldly, Jin Yu suddenly tore off his clothes, revealing a set of tight, white-color clothes underneath. However, in front and behind these new clothes, there was a round, mirror-like wooden piece tightly protecting his chest and back. Part 5 of the series ends here. If you enjoyed it, please give us a like and subscribe so we can be motivated to make even better videos in the future.